Hi everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. We're coming to you live from the land of the Durable people, and I'm here in Sydney, Australia, and so is my guest, Jeremy Lord. How you doing, Jeremy?
Hey mate, how's it going?
I'm very good, thank you. Good to be back with you. So thank you so much for joining us again. We had a great stream yesterday, which was really like tips and kind of tricks and a bit of advice for illustration, like particularly digital illustration in Photoshop, and it was really cool. And I know we've got another one coming up here as well today. So yeah, it's awesome to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, always good to kind of like go back through fundamental things. Again, like some people might be like, oh yeah, I know this stuff.
Yeah.
But there might just be that tiny little snippet of thing of like, oh, you use that button to do that. That's a better way to do it. It's always kind of worth like, I always try and watch those kind of videos as much as possible and not be like, nah, I know that stuff. I don't need to watch it. Like, because there might just be that one little thing that's like, oh man,
yeah,
totally wish I knew that before. That's going to save me a lot of time. But yeah, they were more kind of like fundamental workflow things. Today, I'm kind of gearing this a little bit more easy ways to kind of make your illustrations come to life that don't necessarily require a ton of drawing, right? So it's not like, oh, you could just draw a whole nother character in there and then there's an interaction and that's cool. It's like, whoa, and that's a lot of work. So just basically kind of little like hacks, little tips and tricks that you can add to your artwork that don't require a ton of like drawing time.
Yeah.
That will really kind of make your art, your characters, your artwork, anything that you're kind of doing kind of come to life a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'm sure it will when we get stuck into it. And we are live as well. So if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to throw them in chat. We are live on YouTube and Behance. Hello, Alessandra in chat. Good to see you there again, joining us. So, well, yeah, let's hand it over to you, Jeremy. We'll check out your artboard. We will check out. We'll say it that way.
Yeah. Very typical.
I won't do it again, I promise. We were doing some Yoda impressions
we're doing
before.
the whole stream of Yoda.
I won't do that to anybody.
Cool. So all right, we've got this little kind of Yoda illustration. The pose is pretty dynamic. There's a little bit of movement there, but one of the things that you kind of look at when you're doing this very kind of like, I guess, anime or cartoony kind of style is you're using flat colors and kind of flat brushes in that sense. So it can make your artwork kind of feel a little bit static. And effectively what this is at the moment, like it's basically just kind of like a sticker that's on a background. There's no real kind of like life or like really kind of emphasizing the movement. So we want to kind of make this artwork kind of come to life a little bit. And there's a few different ways that we can do that. Some of them involve line work, which we'll look at. But one of the kind of the easiest ones is to kind of create a bit of an interaction in between your character and its world, like the background essentially, right? So that can mean kind of drawing in a little bit of a background. Often one of the easiest and fastest ways to do that is literally just to kind of ground that character, as in like literally kind of make them look like they're kind of standing on the ground. And that is just like draw a circle, put a shadow, like fill that in black, and that immediately just kind of gives him a solid platform to stand on. And that just creates a little bit of an interaction in between him and the background, right?
Yeah.
So it's a kind of like a super easy way to do this kind of stuff. Anything to do with kind of that idea of like a shadow really kind of shows that volume and grounds your character. So we could do that. We could also kind of essentially kind of draw in a little bit of a sense of kind of like a ground here. But again, that depending on how kind of detailed you go, that's going to require some kind of level of drawing. And as much as possible, I'm going to try and kind of share tips today that don't necessarily do that, because you might not be too sure of like what to put in there and kind of how to make all this work. So effectively, we're just going to look at those kinds of things that are a bit easier to draw. So with this idea, there's a bit of movement to this pose. So we could put a little bit of a shadow in there and ground him that way. or we could kind of analyze what the movement of this pose might be. So kind of like he's obviously kind of crouching. This arm back here would be moving that way in the background. This leg is probably, this kind of foot's kind of like scraping the ground, kind of going back behind him. Mm. So we can immediately kind of look at that and go, all right, let's put in a little bit of like a foot on the ground kind of scrape effect, and have this kind of sense of like he's really, there's a lot of movement happening here. And so that can happen with just kind of this little kind of like cartoon kind of bang kind of thing happening off of the edge of his foot there. And I've drawn that really quite horribly, actually. That's better.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So you get this idea that like the foot's kind of hit the ground and there's like something that's happened off of that. And one of the ways that manga also, or like anime kind of shows this, is to kind of add in a sense of like particle physics, I guess. And like with these bangs, when he kind of lands his foot on the ground, there's going to be potentially like pebbles or little kind of rocks that come out. And so you'll often see this kind of thing where it's just random bits. Like, again, this doesn't take much to draw. I'm literally just drawing little kind of bits and pieces of like black, and like they're super nondescript. But you get this sense of like stuff has reacted to his movement and it's kind of flying all over the page. So that's another kind of super easy way that doesn't require a heap of drawing skill or time, and immediately just kind of gives our character a bit of a sense of like place in the world that he is occupying, and just kind of adds it that little bit of interaction there to kind of create that. Yeah, again, that's a simple interaction. I'm kind of repeating myself. But, it's a pretty kind of simple concept there. But we can kind of push this a little bit further as well, and we want to add a sense of kind of three-dimensionality here, because at the moment it's just like the world reacting to him. So let's try and get a bit of more of a sense of like there's volume here. There's kind of things that are kind of happening with depth. So obviously we want to put in a bit of shading in there. So the shading is obviously going to require a little bit of effort, a little bit of drawing skill in there. But we can also kind of start thinking about, all right, what else is happening in this image? What are other things that we can kind of show are happening without necessarily drawing them in? And one of the ways we can do that is with kind of light. So obviously his lightsaber is probably lighting him from behind. So that's a kind of a nice little detail that we can add in there. But that's still not like interaction with the environment. That's just the character and how he's kind of lit. So what we can do is we're going to add in a kind of like a rim light that's going to come from somewhere, I guess, kind of off screen that we don't have to draw, right? So I've made a new layer. If you saw yesterday's stream, you'll see that I'm making this into a clipping layer. So that's going to stick to the underside of that kind of the layer underneath it. And I'm going to pick a color that really contrasts. We've got a huge amount of green in here because it's Yoda. It's got to be like, got to be that. So if I bring in another green light, it's not really going to make that pop. So I want something that's going to be kind of like on the complementary side of green, which is going to be like an orange or a red, something that's on the flip side of the color wheel to that, and is really going to contrast super well with that particular kind of color. So I've got the green is coming in from behind here. So I want to make sure that my light source is coming from the opposite direction. So I'm going to draw this very quickly in here. And this is probably like going to require a little bit more kind of drawing skill or ideas of kind of like how volumes work, because you got to kind of think in 3D here to kind of figure out where is the light hitting, where is it not hitting, how is it kind of interacting with him, if it's coming from over here, like what's it kind of doing and where's it hitting. So a little bit of kind of drawing required here, but still not kind of heaps either. So there we go. So now we got this kind of light source that kind of like, this is called like a rim light or a bounce light. It kind of complements the other light source and kind of gives it a little bit more volume. But what we can also do now is I'm going to add in a new layer, and I'm going to actually put in a little bit of a gradient light source in here. So let's get a little bit of a gradient light source. And we can kind of put, I'm going to just frame this into a little bit of a mask in here. And you'll see me do this as well on a bunch of other drawings that we're going to talk about today. But now basically I'm going to take this and I'm going to go to my layer, put a gradient on here, and there's this light source that's now happening that is casting this light on the side of his face, but I haven't had to draw anything. It's just something off screen is being hinted at and kind of interacting with the environment and is kind of casting a light on his face. It's a really kind of easy way to get this. Again, there's like, it's not just flat, something's happening. I haven't had to draw what that is, but increases the kind of sense of belonging in that world, if you will.
Yeah. And yeah, that whole idea of something's coming off screen, right? There's a whole nother world over here. You're only seeing this, everything through this tiny little kind of lens, like little snippet of all the action.
That's exactly right. It's like, there's like, it's again, like video games, they always talk about like the world continues when you're not in it, and you kind of want to give this sense of like immersion and kind of stuff. And so this is a really nice way to kind of do exactly what you're saying, which is include that something is happening off screen, you're only seeing this, but it also means kind of two birds in one stone. You've achieved that, but you haven't had to actually draw anything. So it's a bit of a kind of a win-win in that sense. So let's push this even a little bit further still. And I'm gonna, this one is gonna be like, all right, now we're getting into some more kind of drawing skills and a little bit more time and effort. We're kind of adding in a bit of a kind of like a Dagobah jungle background behind him that we can kind of have interact with him a little bit more. We're going to keep that sense of like light happening here. And I've also added in some, I think I had them in here. Yeah, some fires, right? So there's some like droid bodies that have been kind of destroyed. A little bit of kind of storytelling as well going on in here. So a little bit of like something's happening. It's not just like, hey, look how cool Yoda is. This is now painting a scene. There's stuff kind of happening in here. And these fires are kind of casting a little bit of smoke behind him. So we get a good sense of like world dressing right now. But we can also kind of think about like, all right, let's say I'm not too keen on how I drew this foot here. So now I can come in with an extra layer on top of that and choose my kind of black layer, and I'll kind of hide this background so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And I'm basically just going to paint in a little bit of like plant, like grass thing that's just going to hide his foot back here.
Right.
And this is going to look weird, but as soon as I put this in, you kind of get this sense of like, oh, his feet are like in the grass. There's something happening. He's like stepping over something. So again, it's another way to do this, but maybe like feet are really hard to draw, like hands as well. So this is a kind of a cool way to like increase storytelling and kind of give us a bit of a sense of like 3D and volume in the world without having, there's a bit of a kind of like a cheat kind of hack.
Yeah.
But the really nice thing that's going to happen with this is when we start kind of bringing in like a little bit more, I guess, atmospheric stuff happening in here. Like there's air, there's a 3D volume around him kind of interacting with the environment. So let me grab this kind of bright light, kind of yellowish cream color that I created here. And I'm going to paint some embers from these fires. And again, these fires are happening and they can be kind of like the light source that's casting this orange glow on him. But there can also be more fires happening kind of around and kind of looking at that kind of thing. So I'm going to put some kind of little bits and pieces, like basically just kind of like fire embers kind of flying around the joint and casting light a little bit, but basically just looking a little bit more like there's things around him and interaction with the rest of the world around him. So these, at the moment, they look a little bit weird. They look a little bit like, what are we looking at? We're not too sure. So I'm going to put in a little bit of an outer glow on those. And that's going to make those embers kind of glow a lot more and kind of come to life really nicely. And we can kind of decrease the size. We got red, linear dodge. These are all the kind of the settings that I'm looking for. And so now we can kind of start really kind of going to town on some of these and start thinking about like, yeah, there's lots and kind of little bits and pieces coming off of these kind of fires happening. And some of them are flying in front of him. Some of them are kind of going a little bit kind of behind him. But it just, again, it kind of adds this kind of rotary sense of like volume and 3D throughout the actual artwork. And it's, again, like not very difficult to draw these kinds of embers, but they have a huge kind of impact on what you see in the image and kind of how that works. And all of a sudden, we've gone from this kind of like flat Yoda that doesn't really have a whole lot of interaction with the world around him to something a lot more kind of intricate, a lot more kind of storytelling based that really starts to kind of showcase who this character is and what the story in this shot is in that sense.
Yeah.
But again, the hardest thing to draw in here is probably these trees, which I've really kind of loosely sketched because they're not super important, and maybe kind of sense of like those little droid units in the background just kind of broken on the floor. That.
Yeah, it's interesting with the backgrounds. Like I read a lot of comics and, even the top comic, like even Spider-Man or Wolverine or something, if you zoom in and look at the background, it's often drawn like that. It's like there's like a whole silhouette and they're kind of like nondescript figures, right? Because drawing an entire like battle scene, like a cover would take just the artists so long, and they have to do, it's like a 30-page comic book with like, I don't know, 260 frames or something like that. So you have to kind of learn those skills, right? Like, and particularly even if you're working on something that's like a commission or something for, education, like school or something like that, or even something for yourself, like understanding where you can kind of fudge those bits is like super valuable. Imagine if you had to draw even just 5 frames of Yoda, maybe you've got, this is 1 of 5. So if you can kind of get away with saving yourself a lot of time, but it still looks great, then it's a really good skill to have, I think.
Yeah, totally. And exactly what you said, right? And I think it's this thing of like, people don't, this is going to maybe sound a little bit mean, but people don't necessarily pay attention as much as you think they do.
Yeah.
Like I'm a teacher, and for a long time I was like, oh man, I can't wear the same sweatshirt twice in a row. People will think I didn't change. And it's like, I guarantee you nobody will remember from yesterday what you were wearing.
They weren't paying attention.
And so these kinds of things are like exactly what you said. Like if you actually pay attention to what they've done in the background of like a comic book page, it's often just a silhouette, or it's often just like small detail and stuff. And it's just enough to sell the idea without having to commit to something like that.
Yeah. It ain't that kind of movie, kid. Have you seen that?
Which?
The quote from George Hamill is talking about, oh my God, I'm forgetting now, Harrison Ford, and he does an impression of him, and he's like saying, "Hey, like, should my hair?" It's a bit like that. It's like, it's not that kind of.
This ain't that kind of movie.
Yeah, exactly. If they're focusing on your hair, we're in a lot of trouble. It's kind of the thing, right? Like, you really just need the story characters to take you on to the next, keep you engaged, and tell a good story.
Totally. And look, I mean, it's a tight rope walk as well, because you can use that to excuse any kind of laziness on your part.
Right.
Just be like, well, no, you actually need to pay attention to some detail. But often I think like there's a line that we as artists think that people will notice this and they just won't, and it just
Yeah.
doesn't matter. And you're spending hours like polishing these pixels to be perfect, and nobody's gonna know.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then the last thing I'm going to add to this is, again, like trying to get this kind of sense of movement through this. And we're going to, I've kind of taken his arm, just the back arm here, and put it on another layer, and I've put it in a blur effect on that. And it just gives us a sense of the arm is like swinging back and it's moving a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I can hear it.
So yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So that just goes, again, like just adds this sense of kind of like non-staticness. And these background elements, by the way, can be super easy, right? So like, again, like what we're talking about just now is like this kind of thing of like Wolverine. These are pine trees in the background and kind of go rocks. But like, I mean, look how like, I guess, quote unquote, badly I've drawn those in. It's
Right.
literally just like smashed in there, but it gives us a sense of kind of movement. And then the same thing happens here with this sense of like particles kind of flying around. Is it drool? Is it sweat? Is it blood? We don't know, but it doesn't matter. Like it just gives him a sense of like something's happening here. He's got movement, something's coming off of him. There's some interaction with the ground as well. Like it's super easy to kind of do these things if you just leave them nondescript. Same thing with this, right? Like we got Iron Man on a kind of a background, and there's like clouds or mist or smoke. Who cares? Doesn't matter. There's something there. Something's in the background. This is super easy. Just like pick a big kind of smoky watercolor brush and just like smash some thing in the background, and gives us a sense of like him belonging in that world.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. I love that Iron Man. It's awesome.
Thanks, man. So moving on now to like this, we kind of covered this idea of like get a character to interact with his world, right? Like the background, some sort of, whether that's light or whether that's physical objects like particles and embers and like rocks and stuff, or again, this kind of sense of light. We're kind of spoken about that. That's a really kind of easy way to do it. But let's talk a little bit more about the drawing itself and kind of getting the line work to do what you want it to do and kind of sing in that way and kind of get your artwork to pop. So I've kind of done this drawing from reference a little bit. I've obviously distorted it to increase this sense of like perspective and depth. So obviously here he's going quite fast. There's a little bit of a camera blur in the background. We've got a bit of a fisheye. So there's a lot of movement in that photograph. But for our illustration, we're going to kind of increase that a little bit. We're going to make it even more kind of dynamic, make that foot kind of bigger because it's kind of really coming towards us, all those types of things. But still potentially a little bit kind of static. There's not a lot happening here. You don't necessarily get that sense of speed that we're kind of going for in here. So first things first, I'm going to ground him, add in some background, and do what I did on that little Yoda thing. I'm going to add these kind of like speed lines and these little rocks that are coming off of his wheels. That's going to give me a good sense of kind of like, all right, now he's interacting with the background. He's really kicked. It's kind of like his skateboard's like flying on the concrete. I'll put in that curve as well to kind of like match this like fisheye thing. Like it's really like going away from us. But I kind of need a little bit more movement in here. So much like the little Yoda arm that I did as a blur, and I just literally just went in and added a blur filter, like Gaussian blur on that. I want to get a little bit more of a sense of kind of motion through this. And one of the ways that you can do this, if you look at kind of like any anime or like manga in a book, they use this a lot, and really, really a lot. But actually, if you look at what they're doing, it might seem complicated, but it's actually really smart and a super easy way to do this. So I'll show you what the end result looks like, which is this.
Cool.
All right. So we get this sense of like almost like a blur effect on the feet and kind of in certain areas that gives this as like speed lines a little bit. And that really kind of increases the sense of kind of like activity and motion in that drawing. But this can be kind of hard to think about if you think about like, I have to draw everything with scribbles. Like, man, that's really like going to bend my brain. So what you do is you draw it without the scribbles first, and then you drop the opacity down on that layer and you create a new layer right here. And with our pen brush, I'm literally just gonna kind of like go over some of these things and just add in these lines. Now, the biggest challenge I have with this kind of stuff is making sure that there's a good sense of like a perspective grid happening in here. So you can kind of help yourself if you want by doing these lines, because the last thing you want is like for this thing to go that way, but then these guys to go kind of down in another way. That just completely kills that sense of like flow and motion throughout the artwork. So that's what I would kind of probably recommend the most. But basically now all I'm doing is kind of going over my original line work and just kind of adding in these speed lines to kind of create this sense of motion throughout what it is that I've kind of drawn. And so again, that will come back to, oops, sorry, do this every time.
What is it?
I press escape to like unrotate my camera and it shows the meeting controls.
Oh, right. They don't come up on our side, so it just looks like here.
Oh, don't they?
No, they don't. Yeah.
All right.
So that's all good.
So that's basically it, right? So all I've done here is I've kind of redrawn the basic line work just with a lot of like scribbly kind of lines. I've added in some few kind of in different places, but it's a really kind of nice way to get this kind of sense of movement. So here I'm combining kind of two things, like interacting with the environment / kind of getting that line work to really like increase the speed of that a little bit, if you will. So that's a nice kind of little trick again to kind of make that artwork kind of come to life a little bit more.
Nice. It's really cool.
And then we've also got something like this. Right? So we've got this character that we've drawn, just a quick little sketch, and kind of working in here. And again, now I'm kind of going back to this concept that I was talking about with our little Yoda illustration, which is I actually had a really hard time drawing the legs on this character. Originally, this character was full body, and I was like, man, I just cannot for the life of me get her legs to look like what they should, and it's kind of killing the movement of the pose. It just doesn't feel dynamic. It doesn't feel like her weight's distributed cleanly. Like there are just too many problems in here. And also, like, what's going on here? Like, she's in a fight, but again, like the pose is dynamic, but there's not a lot of stuff happening in this image outside of that pose. So, two birds in one stone. I add in some smoke coming from somewhere, something, right? Like whoever she's fighting on the other side has like smashed the ground and she's guarding against it, and it's created some smoke to come off of that. And now I don't have to draw the legs, and now there's some interaction. But I'm also going to mix in this kind of idea that we spoke about here with these kind of like blast effects. And I'm going to add that in, but with these kind of speed lines. And that's going to give us even more kind of a sense of like something projectile is coming towards her from outside of our screen that's making kind of this interaction. And she's kind of like, you know, got these little exclamation marks that are very kind of comic book tricks.
Yeah.
That are kind of like, whoa, what's happening? But so now I'm kind of mixing this kind of line work with that blast to increase that. And you can also see I've added in these little kind of like particle physics around it. So get interaction with the character in the background and problem solved. I don't have to draw the legs. Easy peasy.
Yeah. It looks, it adds that like, there's so much going on, right? Like, and if you know that it's Chun-Li like from Street Fighter, so kind of getting pushed back, maybe someone's done a move, she's just kind of lost, just been hit, just kind of protecting her like head. She's in like a defensive stance. So there's heaps going on.
Yeah, and exactly. And again, it's about like storytelling. All this is very like character driven, right? Like character illustration driven. You want to be able to tell a story. You want to have some kind of action happening in there. And so these types of things are really kind of handy to showcase that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's all about kind of like information in the image itself. But another way that you can kind of do this thing of like, oh man, I can't draw the legs, or I can't do something, or I want to kind of show a sense of volume. In this instance, we've kind of drawn stuff in the image that's relatively easy to draw. So like smoke or like blast kind of lines and that kind of stuff. Relatively easy stuff to draw that's in there. that's kind of hiding those areas that we can't be bothered to draw. But you can actually also add to this, and I'll actually show you guys this one beforehand, which is this little kind of like demon Arale character, where, again, maybe you don't have time. In this instance, this is pretty simple to draw the rest of her body. It's pretty simple shape, but let's assume that's not the case. Doing something like this, where you kind of lock your character into this kind of like circle, so they're standing inside the circle. You don't have to draw the bottom half of them, but then the top half comes out of that, whether it's a circle or a square or whatever, and then it instantly gives your character a sense of like it's coming out of the page, but you've also not had to kind of draw very much for it. So this is a trick that I use quite often when I'm kind of doing this kind of stuff, where I'll just kind of put a frame around something and then make certain elements of that drawing come out of that frame. And so in the instance, we've got this one here, where again, like drawing the legs in here, drawing the legs of the dragon as well, is like, oh man, that's a lot of work that like maybe I'm not too sure how to do it. I'm not too confident. So slapping a frame around it and then making the samurai kind of in the foreground and his sword come out of that frame at the camera. It's kind of like when you put on 3D glasses at the cinema and like stuff like comes out at you and you're like, can I touch that? Is it like actually coming out at me? So it's a good way to cover up potentially something that you can't be bothered to draw, you're not too sure how to draw, but at the same time make it look really dynamic and really pop out of that page. And obviously I've added in these kind of effect lines, which is very kind of anime driven. And this frame is obviously like, this is like a frame out of a manga, but now it's just really kind of popping off that page.
Yeah.
Because this guy's coming out of his frame. So it's like really kind of gives this sense of 3D-ness to the whole image.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you see in comic books like quite a lot. And I'm sure in a lot of manga, which I don't read, but I'm sure that's where it kind of came from. Like this, it adds so much to a page. Like it just seems like there's so much more going on. I always love this effect. And often I'm thinking about like, oh, how do they kind of figure that out? And sometimes it almost seems like the frames are redundant. Like sometimes there's a couple of frames, a couple of different scenes, and you're like, but why'd they put the frames there? But it really does add to the, like, I don't know, there's something more exciting going on and adds like a lot of depth to it.
Yeah, it totally does. And like, if we didn't have that, like, let's say I'm going to go on my image here and actually kind of fit that proportionally to my frame, right? So like, if this image is actually kind of sitting where it is inside of its frame, like all of a sudden it kind of flattens it a little bit. You can't really see the shapes as much. There's a lot happening in this image. And so where are the volumes? What's in front of what? Like, what am I looking at? Where does the samurai end and the dragon begin? Like, it can be very difficult to read this image because there's just so much going on. So doing this can just also make the samurai stand out and be like, cool, samurai's in front, dragons in the background.
Yeah.
Got it. It really like instantly visually be able to kind of decipher those things, which actually kind of leads me in nicely to the next kind of little tip that we're going to talk about, which is kind of similar to the speed lines that I was talking about with the skater guy, and kind of looking at inking. So we've got this drawing of Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. And I did this, I did this a few years ago, and I kind of spent so much time on this, so like really kind of getting all the detail. I went like full nerd on this and just drew every single little piece that I could from reference, obviously from the game.
I was going to say, it's like specific armor that she wears at a certain point in the game as well. So yeah,
exactly. So it had to be accurate, right? And this was a brief for PlayStation. So like it needed to look like the thing that it was going to be. So I went like really, really crazy on the detail. And actually like a couple of weeks after this was finished, I kind of looked back on it and I thought, man, this is really difficult to read this image. Like there's just too much information competing for your eye's attention. And it becomes very difficult to see what's what, like particularly in this section right here, where we've got the kind of the bow, like looking at, you know, like in front of the face and the fingers and the feathering and the hair and the armor. It's like very difficult to kind of make out what's going on, right? The bottom half of the illustration is fine because like legs are going off on their own. That's cool. But the top section here is very difficult to kind of tell. So if you're kind of doing something that's got this much detail, one of the ways that you can kind of enhance the clarity of an image without necessarily having to like think about too many things is basically you want to kind of ink some of this on the principle that the outside of the shape is going to have a thicker outline than the inside detail. So basically, all of this stuff in here is just detail. All of the stuff on the outside is shape. And that's going to kind of communicate a certain amount of like detail or like information to us or not. So basically, I want to thicken up the outside of the drawing to kind of get that overall shape to be a little bit thicker. And obviously, I prepared one earlier, but basically you can kind of see what I'm doing here is just going around the outside of this drawing and adding a little bit of kind of volume to my line, a little bit of weight to my line. And I'm doing this very kind of heavily here so you can kind of see what that looks like. But when that's all done, this is what you get. So we go from this to that. And you can see, like, I haven't really done very much. I've gone over some of the main body shapes. And obviously the bow is going in front of this too. So I've added in some thickness to the bow line and like just right here. And various other kind of things that are like big volumes that are in front of things. And I've really kind of accentuated where the head is separated from the shoulder and the hand is different to the background because there's a lot of information here.
Right.
So this just instantly makes that artwork a little bit easier to digest. You see the overall shape that we're looking at, and you can read it a little bit more and you can decipher what is body part and what is just detail on the armor.
Yeah, I was going to ask you then, like, could you do the quick version of like creating a outline in Photoshop, like offsetting the wider path and everything? But that's not exactly what you're doing. There's some parts where you haven't done that. Like you're not doing the bottom of the bow or the feathers because you just basically be turning it into just like a black outline at that point. It's specifically trying to accentuate those like bigger, chunkier shapes.
It's a great question because there are case scenarios where just going into like double clicking on your layer and just putting a stroke on the whole thing would actually achieve what you're doing in a much faster way. But it would need to be a bit of a simpler illustration. And also, as you pointed out, like I actually haven't edited this section of the bow at all, right? So because that's kind of going away further from us. So the main principle is your shape gets a bit of a thicker outline, but also the second kind of fundamental principle of this kind of inking trick is things that are closer to you have a thicker outline. Things that are further away from you get a thinner outline. So the arrow tip here gets the thickest outline of all because it's the thing that's closest to us. Whereas this stuff over here, I've just kind of left as is because it's a little bit further away from us. More importantly, it's stuff that's in front of other stuff. So the bow goes across her chest and kind of shows the armor. So I need to be able to like make a distinctive difference in between the two. Same with the arrow on her face here. Like I need to be able to really kind of say like, okay, that is not part of her face, which is not as clear here. Like where does her hand begin and the armor behind it end? Like what's her face? Where's her head? It becomes a little bit kind of difficult to add into there. And so again, like here, I would add in some little kind of bits and kind of maybe have like a kind of a sense of like some grass or whatever, like she's jumping off of, and kind of even potentially if I wanted to, I could kind of come back in and kind of show like these kind of movement lines of her like having dashed and it's kind of, jumping away from stuff. So that kind of, again, adds this sense of kind of movement in there. But the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about is something that's going to be a little bit easier to do and kind of showcases a kind of good sense of like easy way to show interaction with the environment, again, without too much drawing. And this is going to be basically to add in this kind of like shading of something is above her that's not in the picture. It's casting a shadow on her. And in this instance, I've done these kind of leaves on this like adjustment layer on top of her to kind of give a sense of like her head is kind of plunging into the shadow of a tree. And it's just a very, very simple like leaf brush that I think comes standard with a lot of kind of Photoshop things where, there it is. This little kind of like standard maple brush that I've got and looking at scattering that a little bit and making some size jitters, angle jitter and scattering to get this effect like basically. So all it is if I undo that and I come back in with my white, it's just going to give me a really kind of quick and easy way to kind of show like, oh, we got some foliage shading. I probably scattered that a little bit too much because it's really going really kind of, it's going a little bit off track. But yeah, that's just again, like something's happening up there somewhere, nondescript, that's kind of giving us a sense of like, all right, that's something behind her is happening. And if we add this into like something like this, we've got some colors and we can put a background behind it. And if we then do the same thing on a background behind her and kind of draw in like shadow of a kind of a tree or something, that's really going to accentuate that even more. So we're going to pop that behind her, drop the opacity, and then smack a blur onto it, just a Gaussian blur, because it's a shadow, it's way, way behind her. So that's just going to kind of sit there. So again, like I'm not drawing any branches, I'm not drawing any trees, I'm literally just using this brush, and we kind of get this sense of like, all right, cool, something's interacting, she's going into the shadow, whatever the hell that is. Got it.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's like, and you did it so quick, right? And I'm sure you could get other brush packs as well to kind of suit the style, or you can make your own, obviously, if that's the kind of work that you're doing. But yeah, like adding the foreground shadow over the face and then the background, just blurring it out, doing it really quick, you can quickly kind of get something looking like there's so much more going on with your environment. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah. And that's basically it, right? So those are kind of the things, the techniques that I would use on various different artwork and in kind of bunch of different ways to achieve a kind of a little bit more of a sense of like life or interaction. So if we look at kind of these two, for instance, there's a lot of those kind of things that I spoke about are in these two pieces where there's just a lot happening. And I'm trying to really get a kind of a sense of like movement and motion going on in these pieces.
Yeah.
And so using some of the techniques, like so for instance, here we've got embers that are kind of coming in from nowhere because it's a war scene and like these things are happening all over. So there's like, there would be fire. There would be like something happening in there. And it just gives her a sense of like atmosphericness. Same thing in here. We got all these kinds of things that are happening everywhere that we kind of looked at over the course of the stream.
Yeah.
That give us a bit of a sense of like, yeah, cool. There's some interaction. There's things happening outside of the character that gives this whole thing a little bit of a sense of like belonging in the world and life, and makes it really dynamic and pop. So that's it.
I love that Jinx one. I knew who everybody was except for the previous one.
The previous one?
The last one.
The last one.
That one.
This one?
Yeah.
This is Eve from Stellar Blade.
Okay, see, I don't know that one. Okay. That's pretty good. See, I'm still pretty happy with that.
Yeah, you did good.
Yeah, really cool. And how, like, you know, just we could even go into like how the different kind of style, like you tend to have like this particular style, but actually almost everything you showed actually, I think was almost in a bit of a different style. Like the Wolverine one was very like, was almost cut out, right? Yeah, it's like almost like a cutout. Like, you know, what, one color?
Yeah.
Really? Like that's a one color thing. Like the Jinx one is like really like punk, like not only from a color but also from like a texture kind of perspective. And then it's really interesting. So I mean that's a whole nother stream, but yeah, super cool. Love the Jinx one too. But yeah, they were great. Thank you for those tips as well. Thank you everybody for watching. And if you like this one, check out Jeremy's previous stream as well, where there were some other tips as well. So we'll pop a link to that down in chat if you're watching this and you've made it this long through the video. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll actually be back in about 10 minutes. If you want to stick around, we have Bill Hope joining us and we'll be looking at characters in motion. So I think there'll be a couple of crossovers between some of the stuff we saw today and Bill as well. So it's going to be really interesting. And Jeremy, thank you again, as always, for joining us on Adobe Live.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll catch you next time and we'll see you all in a little bit for Bill's stream. Thanks, Jeremy. See you, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.